February 28, 2026. Mark this exact date in your calendars, because military historians, economists, and geopolitical analysts of the future will look back at this specific day as the moment the American empire walked completely blindfolded into the most devastating strategic trap of the 21st century. Over the past few days, the global news cycle has been entirely dominated by the press conferences out of Washington and Jerusalem. You have seen the headlines. The United States and Israel launched a massive, unprecedented, and highly coordinated military campaign against Iran. They called it Operation Epic Fury. In just the first 12 hours of the campaign, nearly 900 precision strikes rained down on Iranian sovereign territory. Fleets of F-35 stealth fighter jets and long-range cruise missiles bypassed Iranian air defenses. They struck military bases, internal security headquarters, and pounded the entrances of underground nuclear facilities at Natanz and Isfahan. And then came the ultimate strike, the decapitation blow, the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. If you listen to the political leaders who ordered this operation, the narrative they are selling to the public is very simple, very clean, and very confident. President Donald Trump has publicly stated that the war is, quote, pretty much complete and expects it to be over very soon. The Israeli leadership has declared that they are breaking the bones of the Iranian regime, the foundational assumption. Here is that by cutting off the head of the snake, the body will simply collapse. The assumption is that the classic American military doctrine of shock and the strategy of hitting an enemy so hard and so fast that their entire system goes into paralysis has worked once again. But if you turn off the news channels and actually speak to serious military logisticians, if you look at the raw data coming out of the Middle East right now, you will hear a completely different, terrifying story. The reality on the ground in March 2026 is that America and Israel haven't ended a war. They have just triggered a catastrophic chain reaction that they cannot control, cannot afford, and quite possibly cannot survive without suffering permanent economic and strategic damage. Let me explain exactly why the strategy you are watching unfold is already dead. Let me show you why Iran is not collapsing, but rather successfully pulling the most powerful military in human history into an unwinnable nightmare. To understand the reality of this conflict, we have to look past the explosions and focus on three specific elements that military planners routinely underestimate: decentralized command, asymmetrical math, and the brutal geography of global trade. Let's start with the first fatal miscalculation, the illusion of the decapitation strike. For the last 3 decades, Western military doctrine has been built around a traditional pyramid structure. You have a capital city, a central command headquarters, a supreme leader, and a network of top generals. If you destroy the top of the pyramid, the soldiers on the ground lose coordination, supply lines freeze, panic sets in, and the government falls. That is exactly how the United States defeated Iraq in 2003. But Iran is not Iraq, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRG, is not built like a traditional army. For decades, Iranian military planners knew with absolute certainty that one day America or Israel would come for their top leadership. They knew they could never protect a centralized command from American stealth bombers, so they didn't even try. Instead, they designed a military machine specifically engineered to survive an overwhelming first strike. They built a system of decentralized command. What does that actually mean in a real war? It means that Iranian missile bases, drone launch sites, and regional proxy networks do not require constant, live orders from Tehran to fight. They operate in independent, self-sustaining cells. When the news broke on February 28 that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and several top generals were assassinated, the Iranian military apparatus did not freeze. The exact opposite happened. The system defaulted to its pre-programmed, automated response. The new Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, was quickly installed, but the individual commanders scattered across the massive, rugged Zagros Mountains didn't wait for his permission to act. Within hours, the retaliation began. Not as a unified, single massive army that could be targeted and destroyed by American air power, but as a decentralized swarm. Thousands of drones and ballistic missiles equipped with cluster munitions poured out of hidden underground silos, deep within mountain complexes that Israeli bunker busters couldn't fully penetrate. And this brings us to the second, and perhaps most economically devastating problem for the United States: the asymmetrical math of this war. Right now, Iran is not trying to shoot down American F-15s or F-35s in dogfights. They know they would lose that battle. Instead, Iran has bypassed the American military's technological strength and directly targeted its greatest weakness: economic endurance. Over the past 2 weeks, air raid sirens have been blaring not just in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, but across the entire Arabian Gulf, Dubai, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia. Iran has unleashed a relentless torrent of Shah drones and ballistic missiles across the region, targeting US military installations like the Al Harir Air Base in Iraq and allied infrastructure in the United Arab Emirates. Now pause and think about the brutal economics of this exchange. A mass-produced Iranian Shah drone costs somewhere around $50,000 to manufacture. Some of their simpler rocket projectiles cost even less to shoot that $50,000 drone out of the sky before it hits a command center in Israel or a US base in the Gulf. The United States and its allies are forced to fire highly sophisticated interceptor missiles from systems like the Patriot or the Iron Dome. A single Patriot interceptor missile costs roughly $2 to $4 million. Do the math. If Iran launches a swarm of 200 drones and cheap rockets in a single night, which cost the Iranian regime maybe $10 million, the United States and Israel are forced to burn through hundreds of millions of dollars in highly advanced, incredibly difficult to replace interceptor inventory just to survive the night, and Iran can do this every single night. This is the cold, hard logic of asymmetrical warfare. The weaker side forces the stronger side to spend itself into absolute exhaustion. You cannot win a war of attrition when your enemy spends $50,000 to attack and you spend $2 million to defend. Over weeks and months, the defense budget bleeds out, global supply chains for advanced microchips and interceptors dry up, and eventually the multi-billion-dollar shield cracks. The failure rate of these defense systems is already causing panic. Just a few days ago, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that multiple nations likely the Gulf states currently under fire have quietly reached out to Ukraine, begging for their expertise on how to shoot down Shah drones without bankrupting their militaries. When wealthy Gulf nations hosting American bases are asking for help because US missile defense systems are too expensive to sustain, you know the American military doctrine is fundamentally failing. But the bleeding isn't just military, it is global, and this is where the geopolitical trap truly snaps shut. Look at a topographical map of the Middle East. Look at the southern coast of Iran. You will see a very narrow, highly vulnerable strip of water called the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's total oil supply flows through that tiny 39-kilometer-wide choke point. Millions of barrels of oil every single day, keeping the global economy alive. When Operation Epic Fury began, the United States desperately hoped to keep the conflict contained strictly to military targets. But Iran understood that to fight a global superpower, you must hold the global economy hostage. Immediately following the initial strikes, the IRG announced the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz to maritime traffic. An Iranian military spokesman went on state media and declared a chilling promise: "We will not allow the export of a single liter of oil from the region to the hostile side and its partners until further notice." The global financial markets reacted exactly as you would expect when the lifeblood of modern civilization is suddenly choked off. Absolute panic. Benchmark Brent crude oil prices violently surged past $100 a barrel and are rapidly climbing. Qatarnergy, one of the world's largest suppliers, was forced to cease LNG production after Iranian strikes near industrial cities. Saudi Aramco, the largest oil producer on the planet, issued a stark, unprecedented warning that if this disruption continues, the consequences for the world's oil markets will be catastrophic. This is the ultimate unbreakable leverage. The United States economy in 2026 is already battling inflation, high housing costs, and massive domestic political pressure. A prolonged, uncontrolled spike in global energy prices doesn't just hurt the military. It hurts every single American citizen at the gas pump. It increases the cost of shipping, the cost of manufacturing, the cost of groceries. It destabilizes European economies that rely on Gulf energy. It creates a domino effect that transforms a regional military conflict into a global economic depression almost overnight. President Trump has threatened to hit Iran much harder if they do not immediately open the strait. But how exactly do you hit them harder? You have already bombed their capital. You have already assassinated their supreme leader. You have already targeted their nuclear facilities. You have already played your strongest strategic cards. You cannot bomb a strait open. You cannot secure thousands of miles of hostile, mountainous coastline with air power alone. Securing the Strait of Hormuz and physically stopping the endless barrage of decentralized missiles would require something the United States simply does not have the political will, the manpower, or the economic capacity to do. A full-scale ground invasion and decades-long occupation of Iran. And remember the terrifying geography of this region. Iran is not Iraq. It is a massive, unforgiving country of over 85 million people. It covers en masse roughly the size of France, Germany, Spain, and the United Kingdom combined. It is surrounded by towering mountain ranges that act as impenetrable natural fortresses. To occupy a country of that size, military planners estimate you would need upwards of 500,000 boots on the ground. Where do those troops come from? The American public has zero appetite for another 20-year Middle Eastern occupation. The Israeli military is already stretched to its absolute breaking point. They have mobilized over 100,000 reservists, pulling doctors, engineers, and teachers out of their economy. While fighting a multi-front war and facing a constant barrage of missiles in places like Beit Shemesh and Tel Aviv, The United Kingdom is offering limited defensive support from bases in Cyprus, but no Western power is willing to send hundreds of thousands of their young men to die in the Zagros Mountains. So you have a situation where the air war is economically unsustainable, the naval war is causing a global economic meltdown, and a ground war is geographically and politically impossible. And that brings us to the final, darkest irony of this entire conflict, the original underlying justification for the war itself. Why did the United States and Israel launch Operation Epic Fury in the first place? They did it to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program. The international community noted that diplomatic negotiations had completely collapsed. Israel fundamentally believed that Iran was dangerously close to weaponizing its highly enriched uranium, which is buried deep underground in heavily fortified facilities. So they bombed the nuclear sites. Recent satellite imagery from the IAEA shows massive damage to the entrance buildings of the Natanz fuel enrichment plant, but intelligence sources, including leaks from US officials, suggest the core of the highly enriched uranium stockpile is buried so deep under the mountains that conventional bunker busters simply couldn't destroy it. In fact, US officials have quietly admitted that the only way to truly secure the uranium now is to send special forces on the ground to physically retrieve it, a literal suicide mission. Now, put yourself in the shoes of the newly appointed Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, and the Iranian High Command. For years, Iran intentionally kept its nuclear program just below the threshold of an actual weapon. They used it as leverage, a diplomatic bargaining chip for sanctions relief. There were intense internal debates within the Iranian leadership about the religious and political costs of actually building a nuclear weapon. But on February 28, the geopolitical math changed forever. The regime realized that playing by the rules of international deterrence did not protect them. Their supreme leader was assassinated. Their sovereign territory was subjected to the most intense bombing campaign of the decade. History teaches a very brutal, unforgiving lesson. Countries without nuclear weapons get invaded. Countries with nuclear weapons do not. Muammar Gaddafi gave up Libya's nuclear program and his government was overthrown. Saddam Hussein's nuclear reactor was destroyed and his regime was toppled. On the other hand, North Korea built the bomb, and despite being a global pariah, the regime remains completely untouched by Western militaries. By launching a massive, decapitating strike without actually destroying the deeply buried uranium, the United States and Israel haven't prevented an Iranian nuclear bomb. They have guaranteed it. They have removed every single political, economic, and diplomatic incentive. Iran had to hold back for the Iranian regime. Building a nuclear warhead is no longer a strategic option. It is an absolute, non-negotiable existential requirement for their survival. The clock is no longer ticking in months or years, it is ticking in weeks. And because the United States and Israel have already expended their element of surprise, they have very few conventional options left to stop it. This is exactly what a geopolitical trap looks like. It starts with the illusion of technological superiority, the belief that stealth bombers, satellite intelligence, and precision missiles can solve any complex human problem. The arrogant belief that destroying government buildings is the exact same thing as defeating a nation. But war is a living, breathing organism. When you strike it, it adapts. America and Israel thought they were striking a fragile, unpopular regime that would crumble under maximum pressure. Instead, they struck a decentralized, ideologically hardened military system that was perfectly prepared to absorb the blow, survive the initial shock, and drag the attackers into a relentless war of economic attrition. Right now, as we speak, the skies over the Middle East are filled with $2 million interceptor missiles chasing $50,000 drones. The global oil supply is suffocating. The Arab Gulf states, which had spent years trying to deepen diplomatic and economic ties, are now caught in the crossfire of a regional inferno. And Iran, battered, bleeding, but absolutely unbowed, is sprinting toward the ultimate nuclear deterrent in the dark depths of their mountain fortresses. The American doctrine of shock and awe is officially dead. It died not because the American military lacks firepower, but because overwhelming firepower is utterly useless against an enemy that refuses to fight on your terms. The superpower initiated this conflict to project ultimate strength. But every single day this war continues, every day the oil prices rise, and every day a cheap drone bypasses a billion-dollar defense grid. The rest of the world sees something else entirely. They see an empire that is bleeding. They see a military giant trapped in a web of its own making. The doors to this conflict were kicked violently open on February 28th, but as the leaders in Washington and Jerusalem are slowly, painfully beginning to realize, they entirely forgot to plan an exit.